Now, I know I talked about personal hygiene last week, but we seem to have taken that a little bit too far, haven't we? Who would have thought last Sunday that we'd be in this situation? Sorry, if I'm going to keep moving backwards and forwards, it's going to throw that out. Who would have thought we'd be in this situation? But we are, and God is watching over us as we walk this journey. So as Ben reminded you, after the service, I'd love to take a bit of time where I can explain a few things, but also to have a bit of a question and answer time. So if you can hang around, please do that. Another thing you'll see in your... We've got a really big echo there, so you could probably just bring it down a little. Yep. Also, what you'll see in your newsletter is that Queensland Baptists have called Baptist churches to prayer. And I want to encourage you to do this. I've just put a reminder that 7 o'clock at night, or whatever's convenient for you, to have a reminder to stop and to pray for our nation, pray for our churches, pray for families in regards to the pandemic of COVID-19, and an encouragement on the 29th of March to make that a day of prayer and fasting for our nation as we continue to uplift it in prayer. So I really encourage you to take that up as a daily prayer request for our nation. In amongst all the stuff I've seen on TV, radio broadcasts, internet sort of stuff and everything else like that, there's been a lot of negative things, isn't there? In the sense of we see the crisis and what's happening. But I've been encouraged this week by just significant acts of mercy. Simple things that people have been doing. Michael, when I was on the phone to him, I'm going to embarrass him a little bit, but when I was on the phone to him this week and we were talking about the situation, he said, there's a few people in my street that I know that are probably alone or need a bit of help. I'm going to check on them. And that's been a fairly often conversation that I've had with people. People have just taken the initiative, pick up a phone, wander down the street, knock on someone's door and just say, "Are you okay?" Quite a few people have had maybe their kids talking to them and asking them, have you got everything that you need? And for me, it's just so encouraging when people have just taken that little initiative. Ben this week rang a lady who used to bring some children down to our kids club program, and she's got mobility issues, so he thought, I might just ring her and see how she's going. Lives just up the road. Had another conversation with a lady with mobility issues, and she's got a scooter, but lives over the hill in Kitchener Road, and so it was great just to have an opportunity to say to her, if you need anything, just give us a call. And so I want to encourage us in this time. This is a time for the church to stand. This is a time for the church to be seen. And the church is us. It's not this building. And if we don't have a service here, that's okay. Church doesn't stop because we're active, we're alive, we're at work. I was chatting with some of the pastors this week on the north side, and we're just talking about different things that we're doing. But as we went around the circle, talking what was happening at Rivers and South Pine and Northside Evangelical and Bracken Ridge, there was a sense of excitement. That might seem really strange, excitement. But an excitement about anticipating what God will do in this space. This is a time where we're sort of moved out of our comfort zone a little bit. We're not sure what's going to happen down the track. But there's that sense of anticipation of what we can do as God's people. Into that space as people are fearful and anxious about what's happening. But also that God will be working by His Spirit into people's hearts and lives in that anxiety and in that fear. Opening doors through which we can minister. I'm believing that you will be having conversations. I will be having conversations. And this is already happening. About mortality, about life. Because all of a sudden we're in a situation where these sort of things of the usual things that, tomorrow we're going to do this and next week we're going to do this and we're planning for these sorts of things. Well, we're not really quite sure how that's all going to look. And so into that uncertainty, we can bring something of the certainty we have through Christ. John Sweetman this week has just written a bit of a devotional thing out to all the pastors, and it was on this theme of faith, hope, and love. And so I want to bring that to us today. There are three characteristics that are often linked together about God's people. Paul in particular links them, and I just want to touch on these three verses. 1 Thessalonians 1:3. We remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labour prompted by love, your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. He goes on in that same letter. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, putting on faith and love as a breastplate, and the hope of salvation as a helmet. Paul again to the Colossians. Because we have heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love you have for all God's people, the faith and love that springs from hope stored up for you in heaven. And this one in 1 Corinthians, where Jesus is where God is speaking through Paul about the whole picture of love, and we have that love verses there about what love is. And at the end of it, he said, "Now these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." They're terms that we're familiar with, but I think there's power in the way that they're linked in those three. Hebrews 11:1 says that now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Those words sort of don't ring quite right in our ears, I think. Because sometimes in our language, hope is a wish. It's something that may happen. But here, faith is being sure of what we hope for. And I'll go on to hope in a little bit, but there's a certainty about hope. But also a certainty of things that we do not see, of what we do not see. We can't see God, we can't see Jesus, but we can see the activity. We can feel the impact upon our lives. And that is what that aspect of faith is. It's a trust in a God. It's a decision based on God's direction, His values, and His character. And in that chapter in Hebrews 11, there's a whole list of people who put their faith and put their trust in God. They weren't perfect. They made mistakes. Each of those are the names that are listed in that list. But they trusted God in the situation of that day. And as Malcolm said, nothing happens without God's awareness, without His permission, and in some way, all of this stuff with COVID-19 is woven into God's plans and God's purposes. This hasn't taken God by surprise. And so as this has happened in a broken world, as God has allowed it to happen, He's calling us to a stand. Do we trust Him with our days, with our lives, with our families? We might not know the answers of the why. Is this being allowed? How is this going to work out? But we can trust God and depend on Him. And so that makes a difference to us. It makes a difference that we're not out panic buying in the stores. We're not out fighting over trolleys in the middle of Coles. When we're in our workplaces, although things might be getting pretty bad, and we know some workplaces are shutting up shop, We certainly see in hospitality and tourism that those things are really winding back. If anyone's in the airline industry, we've got some of the fellows from the Sudanese congregation that work out at the airport. So things are winding back. And so in that, our financial security might not be there. I don't know what's happening in the accountancy world there, Alwyn, but things are very, very uncertain. But where does our security lie? And this is where faith comes in. In those verses it says we actually have to put on faith. And so there's an action of choice. Am I going to believe today that God is with me, or am I not? Am I going to trust him with the situation or not? And so that there's that active choice. God, today, this moment, or that phone call I've just seen, or that email I've just had which has changed my circumstances completely, am I going to put on faith? Am I going to trust in you? Those verses also say that the good works that are produced by faith. And so as we practice generosity, as we practice care, as we pick up the phone and talk to someone, as we give away one of those golden toilet rolls that we've got stashed away in our homes, as we give someone some liquid gold, the alcoholic hand wash, we're taking steps of faith that God will provide for us into the future. So it produces those good works that Paul's been talking about. It enables us to be a non-anxious presence where fear and panic is happening around us. And that doesn't mean that we're not cautious. It doesn't mean that we're blasé in our thinking. We're not casual about safety. We take all of that stuff seriously. But we have a non-anxious presence because we have God there with us. He is our provider. He is our rock. And He is our strength. Faith means that we'll serve God and we'll serve others around us. Faith means that we'll pray, believing God can be at work in this situation to protect, to guide, to give wisdom, to care for us, to give us the strength that we need. Faith means that we'll be different because our drive is not me first, but God first and others. And we will bring peace and see peace that goes beyond all understanding. We will be seen as a faith-filled people in this time. So I want to encourage you, put on faith. Put it on as you go out. Put it on as you're in your workplace. Put it on at the shopping centre. May that be seen. Hope. Hope is that confident expectation that God is there and He will do what He says He will do, that He will complete that. Hope inspires an endurance, according to those verses. Hope is our salvation, and hope is in eternity. It's an absolute certainty that God will never leave us, never forsaking us. And so hope lifts our spirits and it lifts our eyes to that picture of eternity. I've talked to a few people through this week, those that have got chronic illnesses and things like that. And I remember one person saying to me, well, if COVID-19 takes me out, that's okay. I know where my certainty is. I know where my hope is. And that's not blasé. That is being real. And so that hope impacts our thinking about this pandemic. Our hope and security are not centred in jobs, money or relationships. They're centred in that relationship with Jesus Christ. And now is an opportunity for hope to flourish. And so as we're ministering to people, as we're coming alongside people, as we're caring for people, people will see that hope in us is different. We said that hope inspires endurance, so we can keep going through the weeks and the days and maybe the months ahead of us, trusting God to provide. We can share that hope of an eternity with Jesus, with others. And so in your conversations that you have, when people are worried about that security or their mortality, we have that good news story of hope in which we can share to others. And already I'm hearing stories of people sharing that. The other thing that it says there is that hope of salvation as a helmet. And so what protects our mind in that anxious thoughts and those worried thinking, as we're worried about our family, as we're worried about our kids, for parents, if you look with your younger kids, but also as children with elderly parents, as we're worried about their situations. Hope gives us that protection to our mind, where we can cast things to the Lord. Put on hope as your helmet. The last one is love, and Paul wraps up that verse in Corinthians in saying that those three remain, faith, hope and love, but the greatest of these is love. We know the very essence of God is love. If you cut God, he would bleed love. Is basically what John says in his letter. And so for God, he doesn't actually choose to love. It just flows out of who he is. And so everything that happens has love somewhere woven into the essence of what it is. And so we can see love at work even amongst the chaos that we're seeing with COVID-19. It works out of God's actions, his purposes, his word, and his plans. He has poured love into you and me if we know Jesus, so that we can pour that out into others. And this is an incredible time, church. This is an incredible time, people, to pour that love into others. It's part of our story as God's people. If we look back through the generations of God's church, Christians have been on the forefront of love in action. And so when plagues have swept the world, it's been Christians out there in the forefront, providing help, providing safe places. It's been Christians at work in hospitals and education. It's been Christians at work in orphanages, for the poor and for the marginalised. And in this time and in this place, it is our time to be love to others around us. Martin Luther King had this comment in the whole thing of the social justice, the civil rights movement when that was happening. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. We are love and we are light as God's people. As people see this as dark times, as difficult times, let that love be in action. So pick up the phone, text, go and do someone's groceries. Go and take someone's script to the chemist. Pray for one another. In our places of work where we are at the moment, we've got nurses here, we've got people in business. Let's pray for them, that God might be at work over them, that God might protect them, and that they might be that light and love in their place. It's been great in this last week as leaders have worked together to share the load, and it's been such a joy to work with our church leadership team and ministry leaders, that we share the load and share the care across other people. And obviously love is sharing the gospel, share that good news. In the days and weeks ahead, things are going to get tougher before they get better. If you've been watching anything, we're on that upward curve at the moment. We're praying that will flatten out, but we're in these sort of uncertain times. So I want to encourage us, let us be defined by those characteristics of faith, hope and love. Let us encourage one another in faith, hope, and love. Let us spur each other on in that. Let us be God's people in this time. That's our mission and that's our heart as God's people. Our vision statement: a family together under God, sowing and growing the good news of Christ in people across generations, cultures and communities, and COVID-19. I've just added that one on. And I'm looking forward to hearing what God is doing in you and in me over the coming days and the coming weeks. He is at work, folks. Don't forget that.